We have lost count at the Toronto Sun how many times we've covered a story or revealed a story about questionable judgments, judges that have really gone off the rails and have put either the public in jeopardy, but really have affected the public's life. And there have been a few instances just this week alone. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Lorrie Goldstein. Okay, Brian, you've covered some of these cases. Talk about them specifically, because Canadians see things going on in our so-called justice system. We see the revolving door of bail. We've seen how many times someone gets out and then reoffends and back in the revolving door of justice, or
Yep.
injustice, one could say. We've had a couple instances this week alone. So why don't you talk about
Yeah.
that one?
I'll go to one Supreme Court case from 2 weeks ago, and I'll mention it quickly. And that was when the Supreme Court said, in a very horrific case where someone was beaten to death, stabbed to death, left to bleed out in the snow several years ago, that the young man who was 17 years and 5 months, well, no, you can't give him an adult sentence. The Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, actually rewrote the law, which said a judge must be satisfied that the Crown has shown the young person had moral culpability to get an adult sentence. And the Supreme Court said, satisfied is not the right language. You must prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. Problem is, Parliament had debated that several times, held hearings, and a majority of MPs said, no, we're not going that way. That's too strict. Satisfied is the language. And the Supreme Court said no. Then this week, you had Justice Paul Chabas, who, former Toronto Star lawyer, activist lawyer, now an activist judge. He's the guy that couldn't find Jordan Peterson's charter right to freedom of expression when he ruled against Peterson in the against the College of Psychologists. He suddenly found a charter right to a bike lane. The province of Ontario said, no, we're going to take out bike lanes in certain areas and we'll put them in other areas, but on these roads, they are causing problems. And Chabas decided that he's going to decide government policy based on his own personal political beliefs. At one point, he even noted that one of the issues under contention had not been challenged constitutionally, and then he applied the constitutional argument to it just so he could overthrow it. He's a champagne socialist judge. He's an activist judge. This is what happens when you have bad people like David Lametti, Justin Trudeau's former justice minister, now Mark Carney's principal secretary, helping pick judges. You get ideologues, and it's a disaster.
Well, Lorrie, a lot of this is the uneven application of laws. We've seen too many times someone who's committed murder, second degree mass, they get very little jail time. There's not enough punishment to fit the crime. And then on the other hand, you have Crown attorneys in Ontario asking for absurd sentences, 7 years, 9 years for Tamara Litch, for example, from the trucker convoy. And so legitimate criticism of these decisions by the Crowns in some instances is being questioned, and now they're turning around and saying you can't question us. This is American style attacks that diminishes the trust in the justice system. I think Canadians' trust in the justice system is beyond that. These are things that we're questioning because we see an uneven application.
I just find this whole thing of senior judges and crowns now saying that we can't criticize them because it attacks the justice system. It's just beyond belief. The idea that the judicial arm of the government, its prosecutors, should be free from legitimate criticism. And legitimate criticism can be valid, it can be wrong, it can be misguided, it may have some good points to make. But the only place where judges and prosecutors are free from criticism are in dictatorships. And the idea that we have this, like I would like to see the size of the pearls that they're clutching when they say that criticism of decisions, not of the judges personally, but of their decisions, is somehow an attack on the justice system and therefore an attack on democracy. That's absolutely absurd. For example, Brian mentioned the Supreme Court of Canada. The way the Supreme Court of Canada got rid of a bunch of mandatory sentences was they would get a case before them and they would literally go, okay, in this case, the mandatory sentence is justified. But if in this case, if these things happened, it wouldn't be justified. Therefore, we're throwing out the law.
Hypotheticals.
It makes no. Our former legal, our lawyer, and who was a Sun columnist for years, Alan Shanoff, said that's ridiculous. The point of the courts is to assess the case that's before them. If there's another case where they see, okay, in this case, that's fine. That's their job. But to literally make up cases, as opposed to the case before them, to make a decision as fundamental as we're throwing out mandatory minimums for gun crimes, and that now we don't get to criticize that because we're attacking democracy. That's dangerous. That's not just farcical. That's dangerous. And as for criticizing the bail reform system as an attack on democracy, for heaven's sakes, the federal government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, says there are problems with the bail system and is supposed to bring us new legislation in the fall. So is the government of Canada attacking? I just, because the difference is no one who's credible is saying, as Trump has, get rid of that judge because he's a Mexican, or get rid of that judge because that's not what's happening in Canada. The criticism is of the decisions that are made. And in a democracy, that's fundamental. If you can't criticize the justice system, you're not living in a democracy.
Brian, I think that the point Lorrie is bringing up is so important, because we don't have the scrutiny and the lens on the justice system or the courts that perhaps they do in the United States. I mean, every ruling, every small county district has some sort of scrutiny put upon it. There's a good works that we do here in the media in Canada. We have our own Michelle Mandel that is covering court cases that nobody else is, and shining a light on these sorts of things. But it's warranted for criticism, because the criticism then hopefully ultimately leads to change, one would think, in either decision making or in law, when it seems that something has been put forward that's unjust. Maybe our interpretation of unjust, Brian.
So in cases like the bike lanes case, or the one the Supreme Court just did on youth sentences or adult sentences for young offenders, or in what Lorrie mentioned, the hypotheticals, I've written about the so-called reasonable hypotheticals over and over again. They don't get a lot of play because there's not enough scrutiny of what is the reasoning that the judge used in their decision. And it is often flawed reasoning. And it's by examining that reasoning, pointing it out, calling it out, criticizing it, that perhaps we can get better judgments in the future. And often in these cases, the Supreme Court one on youth sentences or adult sentences, as I said, Justice Suzanne Cote was devastating in her rebuttal, in her minority decision on this, saying this is a horrible decision that my fellow judges are making. Judges criticize other judges in their dissenting opinions. We as journalists or elected officials can do the same, and we should. And I'm sorry if it hurts Crown Attorney Dallas Mack's feelings, and I'm going to call him out by name, and they're not used to that, but Dallas Mack is the Crown Attorney in Ottawa. He is not the lead prosecutor on the Freedom Convoy case of Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, but there is no way that recommendations for 7- and 8-year terms on a mischief conviction would go forward without the approval or even the some pressure by the Crown Attorney Dallas Mack. So he had a hand in that. If he doesn't like being called out, he should run a better shop.
Lorrie, we had yet another one this week, and again, talking about the uneven application of some of this. Now, again, we need to separate. Some of this is civil, some of this is criminal, some rises to a different threshold. But we had someone who was charged and arrested, and he wanted to kill as many Jews as he possibly could. 60 days house arrest. There's questions around that sentencing. And, are we not allowed to question that? Are we suddenly supposed to say, oh, this is all acceptable?
Well, look, I have so little faith in Canada now when it comes to protecting people who belong to my group, Jews, that and I do want to look. I didn't sit through the case.
Mhm.
I don't know all the evidence. But what I do know is that I find the treatment of actions against Jews and the punishments that are being laid compared to the punishments that are being given to others deeply disturbing. You keep seeing these results of these pro-Hamas demonstrations. That's what they are. People being, they're charged with all kinds, and it's all house arrest. To me, that entirely sends the wrong signal. I think, just to go to another area, the Carney government's decision to independently represent to a Palestinian state, aside from its horrible timing in terms of the trade, that's going to endanger Jews in Canada. There's no doubt
That's
about
right.
it. There's no doubt about it. Because these people will now be emboldened to say, see, the government of Canada says the Israel are wrong, that they're acting like Nazis. And to not reflect on that in the Liberal caucus, which obviously wanted this change in policy, and to do it, if we're talking about democracy, to do it while Parliament was adjourned by the leader of a minority government with no debate in the House of Commons, and nobody cares about that. I just find it astounding. But back to the main
it goes
point.
the opposite of a vote that was held last year,
Yeah,
where the majority in
That's
Parliament
right.
said, no, we won't
Yeah.
do that.
yeah. So to me, politics at almost every level is driving everything. And on the level of our justice system, if we don't stand on guard, it's not just journalists. And Brian made a great point. If you see some of the dissenting decisions in minority opinion, you want to see judges attack the decision making of other judges. It's often formidable, and that's good. That's healthy. It doesn't attack the justice system. But it's not just judges or we as journalists who should have the right to criticize and even to be wrong in our criticism. It's the right of the Canadian people. And for me, for Crowns to start saying, oh, if you criticize our decisions, you're attacking the justice system. No, you're attacking the justice system by putting out that somehow you're free from criticism. It's absurd.
Yes. Well, we will continue with the mantra of question everything. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and go to the TorontoSun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.